Chapter 3, Supply and Demand. In this video, we're going to talk about the things that shift the entire supply line. So just like with demand, there's a difference between supply and quantity supplied. The quantity supplied is one dot along the supply line. That dot is associated with one price and one particular quantity, and that's the amount of people that are willing to supply the product if they knew what the price was. The entire supply line is called the market supply, and it is made up of all of the possible production options that all of the competitors selling the product are willing and able to sell the product at. These are the supply shifters that would move that entire supply line, meaning that it would affect all of the various suppliers and producers at all of the possible prices. Again, a shift in supply to the right is an increase in supply, and a shift in supply to the left is a decrease in supply. Now, when you shift the supply curve, we're assuming that everything else is equal except for what's in the question. So, shifter number one is input costs or input prices. Inputs are the things that businesses have to buy to go into producing their product. And inputs obviously have to be purchased by the business and used to produce the product. Inputs are generally in five categories: land or all natural resources, labor, which means literally the number of workers that you have, but it could also be training of those workers, human elements like experience and learning on the job. Capital, which is capital stock, which is technology. It is also infrastructure. It can be, factories, equipment, the amount of buildings and roads and things like that. Technology we just talked about, but of course, this could be obviously computers or apps or other technology that helps to make the business more efficient. In entrepreneurship are ideas. So when people start businesses, they come up with an idea because they think they can produce a product or a service in a better way for customers than somebody else is already doing. So we also need to have good ideas. So if these particular inputs, which need to be purchased in order to create a product, are more expensive, then your supply is going to shift to the left, which is a decrease in supply. And if there is a fall in input prices, meaning they're cheaper than they were before, the business can now afford to purchase more of them. And thus, that will increase the supply, shifting the supply line to the right, because more total supply can be made with more total inputs. So here's an example. We have a basic supply line here. I picked one particular input for our packs of gum example. So let's say the sweetener that you need to use for your packs of gum, it is now cheaper. The price of the sweetener has fallen. You can now afford to purchase more of that sweetener. And that means that you can now increase the amount of units of gum that you're producing. So here I increased the supply of gum by 5 units at every single price, and our line would shift to the right. Now you'll notice the supply line is upward sloping. So a shift to the right is what we have here. This is an increase in supply. To some students, this looks like the new orange line is below the original gray line. Just be aware that a shift to the right is always something that is an increase in supply. A shift to the left would be something that would move left along the quantity line. All right, other shifters. We talked about technology. Technology is an input, so it is a part of input costs. But technology is so important to production, particularly right now. We have so much access to technology and so many ideas that things like computers and internet and various physical elements as well as things like apps are really important. Now, most companies, if they're going to purchase and implement a technology to help them produce a product, we assume that the business is going to buy technologies that help to make their supply more efficient, faster, or easier to produce. We assume that businesses are not going to buy technology that's going to make their life harder or more expensive to produce products. Now, we know that technology doesn't always work properly. I mean, you can have a whole system of computers in your office space, and there could be a major virus that hits your computer system. And that would be something where a technology shifts supply to the left. But generally, if it's a cost saving or something to increase efficiency in production, those things are going to shift the supply line to the right. The third shifter is the number of producers. So, if you have more people who are moving into the market and they're going to open up shop and they're going to start selling a product, just like all sorts of other businesses that were there before them, you are now going to have a larger inventory or supply of goods in that particular market. So, when more producers enter, we get an increase in the number of sellers or producers. And then, if some producers go bankrupt or decide to close their business, we would see a reduction in the amount of producers. The supply line also shifts because of expectations. Now, businesses make almost all of their decisions based on what they think will happen in the future. Businesses plan out not just a 1 month business plan, a 1 year, a 5 year, a 10-year business plan, because most of them are trying to stay in profit for the long run. So they have to think about the future and what they expect to happen. So this particular shifter called expectations is about the expectations of what a business thinks they can sell their product at. So that's the future price. Or it could also be what they think the costs of their input prices will be in the future. So, for example, a firm could reduce their supply now by putting produced goods into storage. So if you know that you're going to sell a lot of your goods during the Christmas season when holiday shopping is really high, you are going to start producing those products, let's say in the summer. So the supply of those goods happens in the summer, but they don't actually put them into the market yet. They keep them in storage. And then in November and December, they flood the market with an excess supply of goods to meet the demand. So, if firms are going to do this and they're going to store up a lot of goods and then increase the supply on a specific date, then that would shift the supply to the right. And if they were going to slow down production in order to do this in the future, then the reduction in supply would shift the curve left. Number 5 is prices of related goods and services. So, most people who run a business don't just produce one particular good or service, they typically offer more than one. So, if you think about a factory, and let's say that this factory produces lots of different things, then they can choose how much of their workers' time and how much of their factory space to devote to which of the products that they produce. So, I put an example here of crude oil. Crude oil is a raw material, it's a natural resource that is pumped out of the ground. Crude oil has to be bought in its raw form and then it has to be refined. And it goes to an oil refinery and it's refined into multiple products that we buy. One of the major ones, of course, is gasoline, but lots of products are made out of petrol. This includes heating oil, tars, waxes, things like chapstick, and even certain types of clothes made out of polyester and all plastics, whether they're, most plastics are made out of petrol. So if the crude oil refinery knows that gasoline is very profitable right now, then they might use most of their space and workers to make gasoline. But if something like kerosene or other types of oils that they need to produce are more profitable, then they can always shift some workers and some of their production space in their refinery to make other things. And this is based upon what they believe is going to be the most profitable. So remember, we believe that a business is in business to make profit. So dependent upon the sales of its other goods, you can shift production.